Lee, come.
Thank you very much. It's can everyone hear me? Is this mic on? No? Yeah, now it's on. I've got the toy here. Otherwise, I look like Madonna in the back. It is absolutely a pleasure to be here. I hope by the end of this sort of 40 minutes of talking, you understand why I see it so important to reach out to children, but particularly to reach out to you. You are, in my opinion, probably in the most important position that educators, teachers, librarians have been since the Victorian era, because you're going to lead what is perhaps the most exciting period of exploration and discovery in the history of this planet. And I hope you'll get a taste for why I think that way and why I see your role as so absolutely critical by the end of this. I've been involved in a journey for the past 4 years particularly, but I'm going to take you back a little bit before that, that has been both humbling in its magnitude from a scientific perspective and extraordinarily exciting and enlightening about the future of science, not just the present. I work with one of the largest scientific teams ever assembled for almost any project in the history of this planet. Over 100 scientists from around the world focused on this discovery as it is transforming our idea of where we come from as human beings. Like many great discoveries, though, it doesn't begin with this sort of eureka moment that it's going to sound like to you when I tell you the story of an explosion of idea or an instant recognition. It began in failure. It began actually with a failed expedition. I was in the 1990s awarded the first prize for research and exploration, the gold medal from National Geographic, for a series of discoveries I had made on the African continent. And I went to Washington to receive this prize, and then I ended up in these incredible offices of the then CEO of National Geographic, Gil Grosvenor, and the very powerful editor of the magazine, Bill Allen. And the office would look like what you imagine, this wooden place where I sat across as this youngster. And I heard words that I would wish on every person in every scientist's world. Bill Allen said, "You can have anything you want, any amount of money you want, to do anything you want." Well, he meant that within reason, of course. But I got the idea pretty quickly. What an extraordinary thing to hear. And I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to apply what was then brand new technology to the search for more fossils, more of these precious resources. I have to tell you a little bit about paleoanthropology, and that is that it's probably one of the hardest sciences in the world. These objects that we look for, these rare human ancestor fossils, are probably the rarest sought-after objects on the planet. I sit in one of the unenviable fields where there are probably more scientists than there are objects we study. And the vast majority of those few thousand fragments of these early humans are tiny bits and pieces. They're scraps. About 80% of what we find are isolated teeth, if you can imagine that. The remainder are just bits and pieces of postcranial elements, those skulls that you see on the covers of National Geographic. They are truly rare, literally just a few dozen, never before a complete one discovered. It's a tough field. Can you imagine going into a field of science where you have a 99.9% chance of never finding what you look for? It's an incredibly tough science, and that makes it sometimes rather competitive, as you might imagine, for access to these precious, precious materials. So it was in that context that Bill Allen and Gil Grosvenor asked me that question, and I wanted to find more. And I wanted to use technology to do it. Because at that time, some incredible new inventions had been made. Handheld GPS was readily available. It could, according to the ads, get you to within 15 meters of your actual position on Earth and give you a GPS coordinate. One, of course, that good cost about $25,000 US at that time. And I wanted a few of them. In addition, NASA had just released its satellite imagery for purchase. And I wanted that. It could show you the Earth in this gigantic program that you bought in 1 in 50,000 sheet size down to a 30-meter pixel. So you could see, a spot about a quarter the size of this room. That was really cool at $10,000 a sheet. The programs were so enormous. I mean, one map file, if you can imagine, was 200 megabytes. And we had to buy new computers for the university, state-of-the-art computers, just to run a file of that magnitude. But I got these things. And off I went around southern Africa, exploring, mapping old caves that we already knew about, old fossil sites that we knew about, cave sites without fossils we knew about, and finding new sites. I found across southern Africa, but then began to concentrate my efforts in an area right outside of Johannesburg. And what's now called the Cradle of Humankind. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but it wasn't then. A dolomitic limestone belt. And it was there that I began a search. And over a period of 3 years, in what is arguably the most explored area on this planet for these early human fossils, since 1935, everybody in the field has worked in that area from the Leakeys onward. I found 4 new fossil sites. That doesn't sound like much to you probably right now, because 4 doesn't sound like a big number. But prior to that, in the 70 or so years of exploration in that area, there had only been 14 fossil sites found and about 100 cave sites in the region. So adding 4 was a pretty significant area. And of course, I started digging them as we moved into the 21st century. And I found very little, almost nothing. I found a couple of scraps of these early hominins. And as I said, most of us in this field will go through our careers not finding anything. So that was a pretty good deal. But I'm at a university, and for those of you who have ever been at a university, they like their science to appear on the covers of journals like Nature and Science and those places. And a couple of little scraps of early humans, these hominins, don't quite cut that. What was getting on the cover of Nature and Science by the time we reached about 2003, 2004, 2005 were things that were being done with computers. Things that we would call geometric morphometrics, and the analysis using what was then becoming very powerful programs to manage large data sets. That was what was appearing in those high-profile journals. And so my university made the decision that it was going to move my research and exploration aside and tamper that down, the thing that I was now director of. And they were going to hire in a new person to take over and build a new wave of science, a modern wave of science at our university. And they began a search for a director. By 2007, they found one, ironically, a former student of mine. Have any of you ever been replaced by a former student of yours? And I found myself at home in the December period of 2007, surfing the web, kind of in my mind looking for where I was going to go next. The idea had come about that we found everything. The idea in the 21st century, the early part, the first decade, was that all the great discoveries had been made. We'd found every major fossil field for these very precious fossils, and that game was coming to a slow end. And it was at that very moment, sitting there staring at the computer, that I became the last human being on Earth to discover Google Earth. And I did just what all of you did when you discovered Google Earth before me. You did. You looked at your house, right? To see if you're lying naked by the swimming pool? I wasn't. And then you put in some places familiar to you. And sometime in that journey on that amazing free software, you see that little white box in the corner, and you plug in GPS coordinates. And you watch it fly from the sky, zooming in from outer space and landing right on the spot that those GPS coordinates. And I happen to be the owner of some of the most expensively obtained GPS coordinates in history. And I eagerly plugged the first one in, a site I had been working at for at that time, almost 17 years, called Gladysville, a site that was intimately familiar to me. I had found 2 hominid teeth there. In 1991, they'd appeared in National Geographic. That's how rare these things are. And I watched it fly in from space to land on nothing. I put the second one in, nothing. The third one, nothing. They were all wrong. It did not take me long to Google why. The U.S. government had owned the satellites in the late 1990s, and they put deliberate error into them so they couldn't be used for military purposes or other things. And that, with the error inherent in my primitive handheld GPSs, created a compounding error. I had wasted hundreds of thousands of dollars and 3 years of my life finding a whole bunch of worthless points. I was sad. I was dreading the phone call I was going to make to National Geographic. And so I spent January and February guiltily moving the dots from a place where they didn't belong to where they belonged. Because I could see these fossil sites. I knew the area well, I could see their structure, I could see trees, I could see the patterning of them, and I began moving them carefully one by one back to their appropriate point. And it was in the process of correcting that error, something that wouldn't have happened if I wasn't correcting the error, I began to see patterns, or what I thought were patterns. I began to see that the sites were laid out in linear structures. I began to see that the caves and the sites that had fossils clustered together in some odd way. And I also, in the process of correcting that error, began to learn what a cave looked like